How do I get my vocals to sit in a mix?
I know you have a really interesting method. Are you comfortable sharing your little trick?
I don't even know if I have a trick. You're watching Talking Audio Engineering with special guest Simon Moro.
Well, when I've had your mixes sent over, one of the things I think is very consistent about them is that the vocal sits beautifully and evenly through the mix. You told me something you were doing with clip gain.
I was doing that for a period, but
You changed?
I changed. I flip-flopped between different techniques, which is what you should do when the material calls for it.
Because it depends, right?
Because it depends. That's a fairly in-depth, heavy-duty, hands-on type of solution, which is basically drawing the opposite of the waveform, and that takes forever. I'm not sure if that's what you're alluding to.
Well, you were going phrase by phrase, clip gaining everything till it sounded even before compression, if I recall.
Yeah, I don't remember that, and I'm not trying to be evasive or anything. I'm not trying to hide my techniques because I don't really have one. There's a few. Like, I'll give you an example. Back in college, I managed to impress my teachers at the time.
How much did that cost?
40 grand.
To impress them.
It was worth it though.
You got that certificate that every client's asked to see before working with you. Show me your credentials, Daniel, or I'm not having you mix my tune.
To think of what I did back then, I would maybe not do it these days, but I slammed the vocal through a limiter. And what I did with clip gain is I pulled the S's down. I pulled the things that jumped out a lot in the mix pre-limiter, because it was pushed into a limiter and chopped off all those peaks. I had a fairly consistent vocal. It's different to compressing it. If I remember correctly, it would have been something like a Massey or something. So it was a brick wall limiter and just shaved that sucker, shaved all those transients down, and then went into the clip gain and drew out the things that didn't sound right. That took quite a while. These days, I'm more likely to use the low fader on an MV2 from Waves. It's bringing up the low level information. You will bring up a lot more of the sibilants and things like that, and you have to deal with that.
So it's kind of like a bit like Sony Oxford inflator, the Sonox inflator. Yeah,
I'd say so.
Upward expansion. Yeah.
You can play with both those sliders. It's a pretty simple plugin. It's literally like 3 sliders, which is one of them's gain, one of them is low, and the other is high. And the low is the upward expansion. The high is compression. So you can it was originally designed, I think, for post-production. So if you have an actor talking and they get quieter or louder, you can knock them into a certain specific dynamic range. That's the really quick way to do it, but it does have its drawbacks. As I say, it can bring out a lot of things that you don't want to hear. But most of us these days, we're dealing with vocals that are home recordings. Maybe not most of us, but a lot of us are dealing with home recordings which are on the duller side. They weren't run through gear during the recording process, so that they weren't tone shaped or anything like that. And typically, I find they're a lot duller. But you can bring a lot of brightness out of the vocal just by bringing up some of that detailed information.
Can I work with your clients? Because the vocals I get that are recorded at home are thin and brittle and harsh.
I wonder why that is.
It just sounds like poor converters, cheap mic, bad room. That's what I tend to get from the home recorded vocals, that I have to unharshify them.
Yeah.
Are you working more with American producers?
Working with a Nashville-based client at the moment. So that's getting recorded through some good gear, but it's typically dark.
If it's good gear and it's dark, well, that's, I guess, a production decision. Yeah, mine is a sort of inherent flaws of compromise.
So MV2 is really good. if you want to go to the extent of slamming something into a limiter. I wouldn't do that these days. I would probably oversample it if I was going to do that and then clip gain it. That was kind of a last resort. It's an option that could work in a specific situation like a rock song. That song, which is funny, it was a delicate song that you wouldn't have known that I'd done such audio atrocities by the time that I was finished with it. The other thing I find works pretty well sometimes is 2 multi-band compressors with all the crossovers at the same points, doing little amounts. I find multi-band compressors, they don't do a whole heap of compression, so you can be a little bit brutal with them, but I find myself doing sometimes upward expansion or compression or however you want to put it to bring out more detail. But then also controlling that. So when it gets to a certain point, it's like, nope, that's enough. That's enough. Just controlling it throughout the mix that way. So I find once you get the vocal within a certain dynamic range and you're not completely killing it with compression, it's just a matter of riding it. I think if budget allowed and time allowed, I would probably do more extensive stuff on the front end with clip gain. And now with Melodyne 5, there's obviously ways to even that out. I know you use Melodyne.
I'm very, very happy with 5. I love the sibilance control and I don't have to separate all the consonants off and manually attenuate them. And even if I'm not attenuating them in version 4 and below, I'd cut them off so that I wasn't tuning them. So it's a massive time saver. And the dynamic control, bringing up the quiet notes and bringing down the louder notes, is excellent. So similar to you, I have cascading various sort of processing along the way to get me to a result. But ultimately, it all comes down to the singer. There is a massive difference between what I would consider to be a professional vocalist and a singer, even a decent singer. When you work with some of the best voices around, it is so much easier. And, I guess I'm talking about vocalists from, those talent shows. So I've been, fortunate enough to work on some projects with, winners and runner-ups from those shows. And the difference, even though they cop a lot of flack from indie artists that will like to make fun of people on a mainstream television show, the difference in ability is so often night and day. One of those vocalists on the mic, control of resonance, it will just float over the song with just a bit of gentle compression. But singers that don't have that resonance and lack that control, it is a constant battle. And part of it can be if the vocalist is emphasizing consonants rather than vowels, there is no resonance. So you're going to have these harsh transients that are too loud and a lack of body, which means you can't really get the vocals sitting well because there just isn't the body. So then it's, now it sounds too loud. Now I can't hear it. Whereas if the resonance is good, we'll just float on top of the music. So performance, vocal ability is the biggest part of this. Because a great vocalist, a bit of carelessly applied compression and a bit of volume automation and you're fine. An inexperienced vocalist, even if they're quite objectively good, sing in tune, sing in time. I've had artists like that where I have literally had to clip gain every second syllable and fight so hard to get that vocal to sit evenly. Multiple passes of automation, the Melodyne techniques, Waves vocal leveler, a parallel slammed limited mult, and it's still a challenge. And then some vocalists where it's just barely even moving this fader and it's just sitting there. It can also depend on the musical arrangement. Is the music quite dynamic? But vocal performance has to be, for me, the biggest part of the challenge. I guess on top of that, just slight vocal related tangent is considering how the volume of the vocal affects the perception of the music. When a vocal is pushed louder than the music, the louder you push it, the smaller the music sounds.
Yeah, well, they feel like they're in front of the band.
Yeah, so it's shrinking the music bed. When you tuck it under, it's making the music bigger. So quite often it makes perfect sense to have a vocal evenly leveled through the song. So if you skip from chorus 3 to verse 1, it sounds the same. But in some cases, if you think about the emotion of the song and the journey of the song, if the end is epic, maybe the vocal should be slightly buried at the end because it will make the band feel bigger around them. If you're jumping from section to section trying to make sure the vocal sounds the same level, that may or may not be correct. But similar to you, so my generic kind of starting point, a Fab Filter compressor setting that I did that just is a very gentle limiter, but not as a limiter, more just evening it out a little bit. So a gentle opto. And before that, I've done Melodyne gain adjustments. That goes into my vocal channel, and I just have an SSL channel on that, typically the J SSL from Plugin Alliance. It also goes to a parallel mult, which I've been using various different limiters, but I've recently just gone back to the first one I ever did this with, which is Waves L1. So I'm kind of back on Waves L1. The latency is great and it works well. So that's my parallel split. That goes straight to my mix bus in the SSL Sigma. And the vocal OGs, that goes out to 4 hardware compressors that get blended in the Sigma as well. And yeah, so there's, let's say, 2 inline compressors, which is the Fab Filter gentle leveling and the J.
Mm-hmm.
I'll also use Waves vocal leveler on that. We'll also have the parallel blend of L1, and the SSL-J is going out to 4 different compressors. At the moment, it's a custom Federal tube, sort of Verimu compressor that a friend of mine designed, and he didn't design the Federal. It's his clone of the Federal with some changes, and an ISA 430, Avalon 737, and an Amic channel in a box. So so I've got tube, VCA, opto compressor characters. Just a couple of other techniques. One is a VCA for the music. So you can actually turn the music up and down around the vocal. That can be a counterintuitive way to control vocal levels.
I do something similar to that. I will put compressors on the elements, guitars and pianos and other things that are within the vocal range. I will duck them.
That is definitely something that I'll do often enough. And it might only just be in a section where there might be a vocal and a counter melody in another instrument.
Yeah.
So yeah, I usually use F6, the Waves Dynamic EQ, or Fab Q3 for that. And yeah, in my vocal sessions, I've got from my vocal track with the audio on it, that's going out an OGS called vocal key or key vox.
Yeah.
So that key's ready to go without even thinking. I just go to the instrument that's getting in the way, instantiate the plugin and assign the key. That's definitely common. The other thing I was going to say is around making, when you're automating and making these decisions, in headphones, vocals can sound quieter than they are. So you might balance it perfectly in headphones, then listen on speakers and the vocals sound way too loud. So that's one thing to be aware of. So if you're mixing in headphones, mix the vocals slightly lower than you think they should be. And when on speakers, most of the time I'm leveling on my tiny little speakers. I know you might be able to see them how do I do this? Balancing on those.
So they're like smaller than the Oratones, I think.
They're tiny, tiny. And I'll often do it in mono and at a low volume. The reason why I do it in mono is because that lets me hear the vocals a little bit louder than they'll actually be in stereo.
Mm.
And it means that I can hear some of the details and the words that I might not have heard if I was listening in stereo. And then when I flick it into stereo, they just sit beautifully in the music.
I never used to do a lot of mixing in mono, but I've been getting into it more and more recently.
Is that because you lost hearing and you're deaf in one ear now? So was I not supposed to say that?
What? What? Hey, if it's good enough for Brian Wilson, speaking of like that era, vocalists who really knew what they were doing in those days, the Beatles, you used to sing in S and do this kind of thing. Well, not like that.
What was that about mic technique?
Yeah. But they used to cut off
Yeah.
plosives and S's, and they would be doing this while they're singing.
I didn't know that. They were ninjaing their...
You didn't know that?
No.
They were karate chopping their pop filters. No, they didn't have pop filters.
Pantyhose was in such high demand that there was none to go around. Yeah, so that's super cool. I did not know that. I know when singing doubles and backing vocals, it can be a good technique to leave off S's and consonants just for syncing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's cool.
Did I answer your question earlier? You were alluding to getting the vocal balanced.
What I recall was very detailed clip gain word for word. And, I think my comment may have been, I don't think I have time to do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I guess the point being is that the very best solution might be the most laborious. And depending on the result you need to get, sometimes you just have to do the stuff that's hard and takes time.
When you have a template that's dialed in a certain way and you think it worked last time, it's going to work this time, but you're forgetting all of the steps that led to that last result, and maybe you're trying to shortcut to that, and then you find halfway through the mix, this is crap. I've had enough of this. I'm not listening to this song anymore, and I'm just gonna come back to it tomorrow because I've had enough.
Mm-hmm.
Often that's happened to me because I've skipped over some basic things like pre-balancing some stuff. If you need to go to that level of detail, then it's best to do it before you get into that Zen state of mind before when you're mixing.
Definitely. You were talking last time about using hardware in mixes and having an escape route.
Yes.
And the idea being that it's either at the start of the chain or at the end of the chain, so it's easier to A/B or bring in or swap out rather than having it a critical part of 90% of the mix. And what you said before about your templates and how easy it is to just lock ourselves into these templates that we created, and remembering that we create these templates probably just in the middle of a mix. So that mix went well. Let me just turn this into a template. And just the importance of revising your templates. I've rebuilt my template from scratch several times, and I'll buy a new piece of gear and then I'll set it up differently and add to it or change it or hear a technique and modify it. The way that I build my templates, similar to the way you integrate hardware, is to have contingencies and escape routes so that I'll have my go-to place that works most of the time, but it might not work with what I'm using. So I need to, without completely breaking the mix down, I need to escape from that path that wasn't working very quickly. As an example, on one of my reverb channels, I might have 5 different reverbs. 4 of them are deactivated. And I start with the one that works most of the time. But if that's not working, click, click, there's my other option. Or click, click, there's another option. So think that can be important too when designing templates, is design them in a way that they are more flexible.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an art form to getting a template together that works most of the time. You've really got to have the experience though to get to that point where you're building a template where you know that it has stuff in it that's going to work 90% of the time. I would say the only thing I have a solid template on is vocals and drums. I don't really have templates for other aspects, and I bring them in as they're modular, so I delete what I don't use. I use quite a lot of it, I would say, but like you, I would be flicking through 4 or 5 different reverbs, and once I hit on one, that'll be the one that I start with, but then I will modify that even more. I might EQ before or after it, I might adjust the levels. It's never a case of I just throw it up and it works. Sometimes it does. It's so dependent on the material. And I think even with this discussion, we're barely scratching the surface of what it takes to get them to sit in a mix.
Performance is key. The resonance in the vocals is what's going to help them cut through. If the singer is emphasizing consonants and de-emphasizing vowels, it's going to be a challenge because they'll be pointy, spiky, transients that are cutting through, and you just don't hear them through the music. So can you address that? That's where I'd start. Then we talked about tools like Melodyne that can, increase soft notes, decrease loud notes. So a bit of macro compression and clip gain, and then cascading different compressors, blending a parallel limiter in, which will help bring in that resonance. So slam, 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 10, 20 dB of gain reduction, tuck it under. Also, Waves Vocal Writer.
Never had any success with that. Never, ever had any success.
It works when you've done a lot of control and have these other measures. It just gives you a little bit more evenness. And then the other things are, if balancing on headphones, remember the vocals sound softer in headphones than they will on the speakers. On speakers, try low volumes, small monitors in mono. Those would probably summarize what we've talked about. And I think they are all helpful suggestions to get a result. The main thing to keep in mind is, like all of this stuff that we do, it is the sum of the parts. Lots of little bits that address keys. Oh, and also, as you said, ducking instruments that are getting in the way of the vocal.
And just on that, we're not talking like EDM, kick drum, ducking synths or anything. It's literally 1.1 to 1 ratio with a lower threshold, so that it's only doing a little bit.
Oh, so you're talking about the ratio being the reason why it's not doing much.
Well, I've found the best results with that are just a very low ratio and a low threshold.
Yeah, that makes sense. Nice. Pleasant.
I think
We've peaked. We've peaked. Put the limiter on. Great. Well, that was fun.